The cowboy's horse slowed as the sky burned orange across the canyon, casting long shadows over the rugged ground. He sensed something wrong before he saw it, a tension in the air that wasn't shaped by wind or wilderness. When he rounded the curve, he spotted two small figures crouched low behind a fallen tree. The girls were trembling, their dark braids dusty, their breaths sharp and uneven. One clutched the other like she was protecting a fragile heartbeat. The cowboy dismounted quietly, understanding that sudden movements could make fear explode. He lifted his hands gently, trying to show he meant no harm. The older girl looked ready to run, but exhaustion dragged her down. Her eyes, fierce but frightened, darted from the shadows to the cowboy as if weighing whether danger stood behind him or in front. He knelt slowly, meeting her gaze without force, letting her read the kind of man he was. A branch snapped somewhere behind the rocks, a sound too heavy to belong to animals. The girls flinched violently. The cowboy didn't hesitate. He motioned them toward his horse and gently guided them forward, feeling their fear trembling through their hands as they climbed onto the saddle without a word spoken. The horse sensed the tension instantly, snorting as the cowboy swung up behind them. He wrapped one arm protectively around both girls, and with a nudge, they pushed off across the open stretch. Dust rose behind them like a warning smothered by the gallop's urgency. As they rode into safer ground, the younger girl looked up at him with wide, guilt-heavy eyes, as if she feared she was burdening a stranger. He simply nodded, letting the gesture carry reassurance. Some rescues carried no need for speech, only steadiness where chaos once stood. By the time the canyon walls softened into rolling land, the girls' trembling eased, though exhaustion pulled at their shoulders. The cowboy slowed the horse, keeping alert with the instinct of a man who had learned survival from harsh terrain and harsher people. They reached a small camp he used on long rides. Smoke from the earlier cook fire still lingered. He helped the girls down, offering water first. The older one hesitated, studying him with a warrior's caution, then handed the cup to her sister before drinking herself, showing her protective nature ran deep. When the girls finally spoke, their voices were thin, as though words had been scraped by fear. They explained that strangers had chased them, outsiders who roamed the land with malicious intent. They had been gathering herbs when the men appeared, forcing them to flee deeper into the canyon's dangerous maze. The cowboy listened without interruption, leaning on the saddle horn, feeling the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. He knew these lands well, but he also knew trouble traveled through them like wildfire, never predictable and always hungry for victims who couldn't fight back. He stirred the campfire back to life, its warmth cracking softly through the cooling dusk. The girls sat near it, their faces finally illuminated enough for him to see their exhaustion. The younger leaned against her sister, drifting in and out of rest, comforted only by shared breath and newfound safety. The cowboy stayed watchful, scanning the tree line, hearing the silent echoes of whatever had hunted them. He didn't know if those men had tracked their escape, but he wasn't naive enough to assume danger simply disappeared. Trouble often lingered like a scent after a storm. The older girl's voice broke the quiet, whispering her gratitude. Her tribe lived miles away, too far to reach before nightfall. She feared the men would search for them until the moon rose high. The cowboy assured her she was safe here, though his mind continued working through possibilities. Night crept softly over the camp, carrying cold air that settled like an unwelcome guest. He set a warm blanket around both girls, noticing how instinctively they curled together, relying on each other's strength. Their bond reminded him of times he, too, had survived only by trusting the right person. The firelight flickered across the canyon's edge, and the cowboy's eyes followed every shifting shadow. He knew he had stepped into something complicated, something that didn't belong to him yet now demanded his involvement. But the sight of those terrified faces made retreat impossible. The older girl revealed that their mother would be searching for them by now, a woman who carried fierce reputation across the land. The cowboy had heard stories about a skilled Apache healer and tracker who could find a trail even in wind-swept dust. He hoped those stories rang true tonight. As darkness deepened, the girls' exhaustion finally pulled them into fragile sleep. The cowboy sat near the fire, his hand resting on his rifle though he hoped never to use it. He watched over them with a quiet determination, feeling responsible for them in a way that surprised him. The night seemed endless, but he stayed awake, listening to the soft breathing of the children who trusted him without knowing his past. He had seen enough cruelty in the world to choose the side he stood on, even when the cost was high. Saving them felt like redemption he didn't ask for. When the first hint of moonlight touched the canyon, something shifted in the air. A distant call, soft but unmistakable, drifted toward them. The older girl stirred, eyes half open, whispering that the voice belonged to her mother. The cowboy felt his pulse quicken, wondering what dawn would bring. But beneath the relief, he sensed something else building, a new chapter that had been set into motion the moment he lifted them onto his horse. As he stared toward the dark horizon, he knew his life would not return to its simple rhythm after this night. The wind carried whispers of the approaching footsteps, light but confident. The girls woke fully, gripping each other with hope instead of fear. And the cowboy stood, adjusting his hat, preparing himself to face the woman who would arrive at sunrise with gratitude, questions, and something far more unexpected. The mist rolled across the camp like a slow-moving tide, softening the shapes of tents and dying embers. The cowboy rubbed the sleep from his eyes, unaware of how the day would unfold. The girls sat near the fire, wrapped in blankets, glancing every few seconds toward the tree line as if expecting something. The first sign was silence, too complete, too unnatural. Birds that usually stirred at dawn had fallen quiet. Even the horses shifted uneasily. The cowboy stood, scanning the dim horizon, his hand instinctively near his holster though he hoped he wouldn't need it today. A silhouette emerged from the fog, tall and graceful but unmistakably dangerous. She walked with a slow, commanding stride, each step deliberate. Her carved staff tapped against stones, echoing like a warning. The girls gasped, dropping their blankets, and ran toward the approaching figure before the cowboy could react. The woman knelt, allowing the girls to press their faces into her waist. Her hands were steady as she touched their hair, checking for injuries, whispering something soft yet stern. Only after reassuring herself they were truly unharmed did she lift her gaze toward the cowboy, her expression unreadable, almost unsettling. Her eyes held the sharpness of someone who had witnessed more loss than comfort. She stood still for several heartbeats, measuring the cowboy with a quiet that made him shift uneasily. His instincts told him she was not here simply to say thanks, but also not to accuse. Something deeper simmered between those possibilities. When she finally approached, the staff in her hand glimmered with carved symbols. The girls remained behind her, gripping her clothing as though she were their anchor to the world. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady, carrying the weight of both gratitude and judgment intertwined. "You saved what is most precious to me," she said, her words slow, each syllable carefully chosen. "And such deeds must be repaid." The cowboy opened his mouth to say it wasn't necessary, that anyone would have helped, but she raised a hand, silencing him without force, only authority. He realized then she was no ordinary tribeswoman, she held a position of respect or power. Her presence alone shifted the energy of the camp. Even the horses bowed their heads slightly, sensing that something larger than gratitude or debt was at play. The cowboy felt the weight of a new responsibility settling on him. The girls whispered to her, their tiny voices urgent. The mother listened carefully, her eyes tightening as they described what had chased them. Fear hardened into anger, then softened into relief when they mentioned how the cowboy had shielded them. She turned back toward him, her posture straightening with new resolve. "You carried them through danger you did not create," she continued. "And you stayed with them through the night." Her tone softened but only slightly. "Such loyalty is rare among your kind." The cowboy felt heat rise in his face, unsure whether to feel honored or embarrassed by her blunt honesty. She stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. The fog swirled around her figure like a cloak. The cowboy met her gaze and held it, surprised by the quiet intensity there, not hostility, but a deep, piercing evaluation, as if she could see straight through his intentions and find the truth beneath. "You risked misunderstanding," she said, voice lowering. "Risked blame. Risked danger. Most would not have intervened." Her staff touched the dirt between them, marking the boundary of what would happen next. "When a man protects children not his own, my people believe that the spirits watch his choices with care." The cowboy swallowed, wishing she wouldn't look at him like he had done something extraordinary. He wanted to tell her he hadn't thought, he had acted because fear in a child's eyes was something he could never ignore. But every word he prepared felt small, insufficient beside her solemn recognition. The girls tugged at her clothing, murmuring again. She nodded slowly, then motioned for the cowboy to kneel. He hesitated, glancing around the camp as if hoping for guidance. None came. Her expression didn't change, but the air around her seemed to insist. He lowered himself, resting one knee on the ground. She placed her hand lightly on his shoulder, her fingers warm and steady. The girls watched silently, their expressions a mixture of admiration and relief. The mother closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, as though drawing strength from something unseen. The cowboy felt a strange calm settle over him. Then she spoke softly, words that sounded both blessing and promise. "You have stepped into a path with no turning back," she murmured. "Those who hunted my daughters will not forget what you did. They will return, and they will seek answers. When they come, you will not face them alone." Her hand lifted, and she gestured toward the canyon behind her. From the shadows, several Apache warriors stepped forward. Their faces were stern, but their weapons remained lowered. They were not there to challenge him but to acknowledge him. Each one nodded, silent but respectful. The cowboy felt the weight of the moment deepen. Whatever reward he'd expected, a simple thank you, maybe safe passage, was nowhere close to what she intended. This was not repayment, this was alliance, something far more binding and dangerous than money or gifts. His life had just changed, whether he welcomed it or not. The mother signaled to one of the warriors, who stepped forward with a small bundle wrapped in patterned cloth. He offered it to her with both hands, bowing his head. She took it and turned to the cowboy, holding the bundle between them like an oath. Her expression remained unreadable. "This is the beginning of your repayment," she said. "Not the end." She extended the bundle slowly. "Inside is a token of protection. Carry it, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that the girls you saved now walk under your shadow as you walk under ours." He accepted it hesitantly, fingers brushing the woven fabric. It felt unexpectedly heavy, like a weight meant to shape destiny rather than adorn it. When he looked up again, the mother's eyes softened, just barely. "You did not save them to earn reward," she said. "That is why the reward must be given." The girls hugged him unexpectedly, their small arms wrapping around his arm and waist. Their trust struck him harder than any thanks. He knelt again to meet their height, feeling their trembling ease into something warm and grateful. He realized then that he had become part of their story. When he stood, the mother stepped back, her staff tapping against the earth once more. "Danger is not finished," she warned. "But now, neither are you." She turned toward the canyon, guiding her daughters. The warriors followed in quiet formation, but one paused long enough to give the cowboy a final nod. As the mist swallowed them, the cowboy looked down at the bundle in his hands. Something inside pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat or a promise. The camp remained silent, but not with fear, more like awe. The cowboy finally understood that he had not just saved 2 lives, he had stepped into a world he barely knew. He breathed slowly, ready for whatever came next, knowing dawn had brought more than a mother's gratitude. It had brought a future woven with danger, loyalty, and a destiny he had not chosen but could no longer refuse. The wrapped deer hide felt unexpectedly warm in his hands as the morning breeze curled through the canyon, carrying traces of smoke and sage. The cowboy met the woman's steady gaze, sensing she offered far more than a simple token. The 2 girls stood close beside her, their relief finally easing into safety. He loosened the knots on the deerhide bundle and glimpsed faint lines burned into the surface, old marks layered like memories. The Apache woman watched him without blinking, as though waiting for his spirit to recognize something his eyes could not. The cowboy swallowed, unsure but strangely drawn to it. The girls, both now calmer, stepped forward and touched the edge of the bundle, their fingertips gentle, almost reverent. They whispered to each other in their language, glancing at him as if they knew exactly how this object would shape his road ahead. Their mother simply stood strong and silent. When he lifted the bundle closer, the weight shifted in a way that didn't match its size, as though something inside lived between the world of matter and memory. He felt a faint pulse, subtle but unmistakable, running across his palms. The sensation startled him, yet he didn't pull away. The Apache woman placed her hand lightly on his wrist, grounding him against the creeping sense of mystery. Her touch carried confidence, the kind that came from surviving storms. Her voice softened as she said that protection meant more than hiding behind walls, it demanded courage to face unseen dangers with steady resolve. The cowboy nodded, feeling the meaning settle deeper within him, heavier than the bundle itself. He recalled how he'd found her daughters trembling behind the fallen tree, breathless with fear. Kindness had felt like the only choice, not expecting gratitude, certainly not expecting an heirloom carrying ancient strength. He closed the deer hide halfway, unsure whether he should look further inside. The mother tilted her chin, silently encouraging him to continue. Her daughters leaned in too, eyes bright with anticipation, as though they were witnessing a ceremony as old as the canyon itself. He inhaled slowly and lifted the folds again. Inside lay a carved stone talisman shaped like a spiral breaking into 3 paths. Its surface shimmered faintly in the morning light, catching dust motes in delicate patterns. The cowboy felt its coolness seep into his skin, calming and unsettling at the same time. It radiated meaning he couldn't translate. He asked quietly what the talisman was meant to protect him from. The Apache woman studied the horizon before answering, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had outlasted grief and wilderness alike. She told him the land had moods, shifting loyalties, and the talisman helped the worthy find balance during troubled seasons. The cowboy listened, unsure whether to believe in such things. Yet he couldn't deny that his life often felt shaped by forces beyond simple logic. Outlaws, storms, wandering souls, choices that returned years later. Maybe a man needed more than grit to stay standing. Maybe something older guided the quiet moments. He placed the talisman against his chest for a moment, testing its warmth against his heartbeat. It felt right somehow, like a piece of the world had been handed back to him in a more personal form. The Apache woman watched with approval, sensing his acceptance even before he spoke. Her daughters approached him and touched his sleeve gratefully, their earlier fear replaced by trust. Their mother remained steady but allowed a rare softness to appear in her eyes. She said few men in these lands acted without expecting reward, and fewer still protected strangers with a pure heart. The cowboy shook his head, insisting he'd only done what any decent man should do. But the Apache woman gently corrected him, saying decency was rare, rarer still when danger closed in. She motioned toward the talisman, explaining that its power awakened only for those who acted without selfish motive. The breeze carried their words across the quiet camp, stirring embers from the fire pit. The girls sat nearby now, finally at ease. The cowboy felt an unexpected connection to them, as though rescuing them had woven an invisible thread between their paths. The talisman pulsed lightly in his palm. He wondered aloud what he was meant to do with such a gift. The Apache woman tilted her head and said the land would show him in time. Protection, she explained, was not a shield but a responsibility. By taking the talisman, he accepted a bond that would tug at him when needed. He felt both humbled and uncertain, unsure whether he was worthy of such a legacy. But the Apache woman stepped closer, her presence steady and commanding. She said a 30-year-old woman who had survived war and wanderers could see truth in a man faster than most. She saw courage in him. Her words unsettled him in a different way, striking deeper than he expected. He met her gaze, recognizing strength carved from decades of hardship. She stood only a step away, her daughters safe at her back, offering him something he didn't fully understand but sensed he couldn't refuse. The sun rose higher, brushing gold along the canyon walls. The cowboy noticed how the talisman caught the light, glowing as if awakened by the day. The Apache woman nodded, reading the shift in his expression, knowing he was beginning to accept the path ahead. Her daughters looked proud. He slipped the talisman into a pocket inside his vest, close to his heart. The Apache woman approved, explaining that the spirit of the land responded best when such objects were carried with intention. He felt its weight settle against him, no longer foreign but oddly familiar. The girls returned to their mother's side and whispered something that made her smile briefly. She told the cowboy her daughters believed he would cross their path again, that destiny rarely ended with one sunrise. The cowboy laughed softly, unsure but warmed by the thought of future encounters. As the morning continued, the Apache woman prepared to leave, adjusting the straps of her pack and guiding her daughters close. She turned back to him and thanked him not only for saving them but for listening without judgment. The talisman, she said, would echo that same clarity wherever he rode. The cowboy tipped his hat, wishing them safe travel. He watched as they walked toward the canyon trail, their silhouettes framed by rising light. The talisman warmed again, almost reassuring him that this wasn't an ending. Something had begun, something he hadn't expected when he first saw the girls. He stood for a long moment after they disappeared, letting silence settle. The talisman pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat that wasn't his. He wondered what challenges waited on the horizon and whether this strange gift would truly protect him when the land decided to test his spirit. Finally he mounted his horse and turned toward the open plains. The breeze carried the scent of sage and dust, reminding him that the world was shifting in quiet ways. Whatever destiny the Apache woman had placed in his hands, he would face it with steady will and honest heart. He urged his horse forward, feeling the talisman warm against his chest. A sense of belonging stirred in him, fragile yet firm. For the first time in a long while, he felt guided, as though someone had lit a lantern on the long path ahead. His journey had changed forever. 10 prompts for story scenes. Girl 30 years old, male 35 years old. A 30-year-old Apache woman presenting a glowing deerhide bundle to a 35-year-old cowboy at sunrise, canyon cliffs glowing behind them. Cowboy opening a carved talisman inside deerhide as morning light reveals ancient patterns. Apache mother and daughters standing proudly before offering a spiritual reward to the cowboy. Cowboy feeling the talisman pulse softly against his palm while wind moves through sagebrush. Apache woman explaining the land's protection while her daughters watch with grateful eyes. Cowboy tucking the carved talisman into his vest as sunlight glints across its spiral design. Canyon camp at dawn with smoke rising and the mother studying the cowboy's character. Two Apache girls smiling as the cowboy begins to understand the gift's deeper meaning. Apache woman with fierce eyes handing over a sacred heirloom wrapped in deerhide. Cowboy riding away with the talisman glowing faintly. Canyon horizon stretching ahead.